Hey everybody, welcome back. In today's episode, I'm going to tell you how I'm using ChatGPT to help me write code. I used it to help me write this U.S. Treasury Securities valuation calculator, which is available on my website, ustreasuryyieldcurve.com. So here's basically what the feature does. You have a bond, or in this case, a U.S. Treasury, has a coupon payment that it pays, and it has a face value that you get at the end of the bond maturity. And what I want to do is I want to calculate what the impact of an interest rate shift would be on the value of this security. So let's say, for example, you buy a 10-year treasury here at a coupon yield of 4.5%. Let's say interest rates go down to 2%. Using the present value formula at 2%, it'll show you that the market value of that could be expected to be around $12,255. Now, this isn't really a precise measurement, but it uses the finance formula for present value, discounted cash flow basically, to give you an estimate of what this bond should be worth on the secondary market. And as you can see here, let's say interest rates go up, you're going to start losing money on your bond. The value of it in secondary market or off the run is going to go down to $8,200. So you're going to lose 17% or so. And then also using this tool, you could see that if you change what the maturity is, like if you go from the 10-year to the 30-year, you could see that the change in value is more dramatic. Man, if only Silicon Valley Bank had a tool like this. Okay, so here's how I incorporated ChatGPT into my process for building this tool. I started out by asking a question to help me write the bond valuation function in this program that's kind of powering the application. So I asked ChatGPT, I need to create a JavaScript function that's equivalent to the payment function in Excel. The purpose will be to calculate the value of a bond given a coupon payment, principal, and market interest rate. We could create a function from scratch, or we could use a library of your recommendation. Now, I have two typos in my prompt here. Instead of saying I accidentally typed a need to create, so that was a typo. And really, the payment function is probably not the best analog to what I'm trying to do. I think there's another function called present value or PV. So I'm not really trying to find what the payment would be because we already are starting with a coupon payment. What we want to do is we want to find the present value of future coupon payments. So ChatGPT gave me a response, and I was quite impressed with it. So it knew what I was talking about and said that if you'd like to create a JavaScript function to calculate, pretty much reiterated my question, but it gave me what the formula is for present value right here. And it told me what the inputs would be into the function that it's going to build, and it actually wrote the JavaScript function. So this is quite new of a thing in programming, is that I was able to give ChatGPT a concept to work with, and it was able to figure out what I was talking about and write the appropriate code for it. Very impressive, and I really like that. It saved me a lot of time of trying to look this up and trying to translate the math into JavaScript. And it did a really nice job coding this as well because everything is nicely labeled. It's using variables that are easy to understand. So if I have to debug this later, I could look at this code and I'll know exactly what's going wrong or what I want to add or modify to it. And it even gave me a little bit of an example here on what I would put in as the inputs, what that would look like and what it would calculate. And as I suggested, it gave me a reference to the finance.js library, but you know, I really don't like using third-party dependencies when I don't have to. This is a pretty simple function, so I just pretty much copied this into my program, and while I had to make a few tweaks later on, which we'll talk about, basically you could see it's copy-pasted and it's right here sitting in the code in a little module that I made here called Finance Math, which is referenced by my stimulus controller. Now, I also asked it give me a modification of this simplified function that instead of taking a coupon payment would do the valuation for a zero coupon bond. So if you have a treasury bill that's 6 months, that's going to expire in 6 months or less, you don't really have a coupon payment with that because the coupon payment is going to be the last payment, which is the face value of the bond. So this formula is going to be a little bit simpler, and it was able to understand what I was talking about using the context from the last question, and it wrote up another function giving me the example. I found that ChatGPT can also be a helpful resource when I'm trying to research the domain knowledge around a particular problem. So in this case, I was looking at the Treasury Direct website, and it gave me a couple of figures related to this T-bill. It provided something called the investment rate and the yield. And given it was a T-bill, I was a little confused what the difference was of what it meant by investment rate and yield. And so I asked ChatGPT if it happened to know, and it gave me some explanation of what could be the difference between what Treasury Direct is referring to. Give me these math formulas as well. And I also asked for some follow-up questions and about the math going into this, and it was quite interesting. It was able to understand what I'm talking about in the same context, and we had a conversation about what the difference of these things are. Now, in another conversation that I had with ChatGPT, I was trying to figure out what the difference is between the reverse repurchase rate and the discount rate that's set by the Federal Reserve. I had trouble figuring out from all the sources I was trying to read what the difference is between the two. And ChatGPT was able to clarify for me that the reverse repo facility is what the Fed's going to pay you, like a very short-term T-bill if you lend money to the Fed, while the discount rate is when banks are borrowing from the Fed. And it gave me a lot of interesting information about the different types of funds that are allowed to use each type of facility. Now, you have to be very careful when using ChatGPT for pure information like this because it is very often wrong. So I find it to be a useful tool to give me a starting point for further research that I could verify with other additional sources. However, sometimes if you're having trouble understanding a concept and you need it explained to you in a different way, ChatGPT could try to explain a concept like that. And this is really useful because sometimes the information that you're looking at is scattered across various websites. So, for example, a lot of this stuff with the banking terminology, it's split across various Federal Reserve and government websites, and kind of gathering all those details together is kind of a research project. ChatGPT, by asking it a particular question to kind of put all of that information together for you, could save you a lot of time because it could tell you where to look and give you a good overview to start from. Now, Bing search is useful in its own way because it gives you citations right there on where to look for things. It doesn't give you as much of a detailed response as ChatGPT in a lot of cases, but it kind of gives you that good overview and will give you links to places you could go for further reading. That's something that I really like about the Bing search engine. But if you're researching a complex topic, using a combination of ChatGPT and Bing could probably speed up your research process quite a bit. So ChatGPT gave me the function to calculate the value of a bond, and in testing it out in my program, I found out that when I go to the 6-month Treasury bill or the 3-month Treasury bill, it wasn't working. It was giving me a 0 result. And the function had to be modified because I wanted to use the same function when there weren't any coupon payments left. There was a little bit of a bug, I guess you could say, in that particular function that it gave me. So I told ChatGPT, hey, the calculate bond price function you gave me doesn't work for treasuries with a maturity of 6 months or less. I believe the issue is that, from me looking at the code, that there are no coupon payments, and because of that, the total periods and the way that does the calculation comes out to 0, so the principal ends up equaling the face value, and there's no adjustment for the interest rate change. So I asked ChatGPT, I challenged it, how will we change this code and modify it? So impressively, it looked at its own code, and it admitted its error, and it went ahead and gave me the modification to the code to make to get this to work. That was pretty cool. So then when I was working on updating my program, there was some stuff in it that I had to change, and it's just kind of the long typing, sort of repetitive, boring task that I do as a programmer. Why do all that typing myself when I could have ChatGPT do it for me? So what I did was I copy pasted a bunch of code that I needed to change, and I told ChatGPT, hey, you know what? I need to reformat it in this particular way so that these keys on the hashes are changed and the condition that it's evaluating is a little bit different. And this was kind of difficult to modify. It kind of made sense to just have it in a list rather than try to do some sort of fancy meta programming with it. I mean, the original code that I'm working with here, it's basically a hash that I'm mapping, and you see here on each line, it's slightly different because it's referencing a different thing. Yeah, it's probably not the best code, but I had to change these conditions. I want to have ChatGPT do it for me, and it went ahead and did that for me. So it started typing this out. Unfortunately, it hit the character limit there, and I asked if it could finish what it started and give me what the remainder was. It went ahead and did it and reformatted this whole hash for me. That was pretty cool. Yeah, there's a lot of times when I'm programming something and there's this repeated pattern, and it's a pattern that is slightly different in a lot of different ways, but in general the same. And sometimes it's a little bit difficult to try to do a find and replace on it because it might be a really long string. So you can't really like find and replace with a regex, or it would be really difficult to do. It's kind of nice being able to tell ChatGPT, hey, I have this thing that I need to reformat. Could you just change it around to look like this? And it'll rewrite the code. It does the kind of menial task for me. That's really fun. Now, what I'm really looking forward to is if I could plug this in to my IntelliJ editor and have it work with the context of the whole program and make changes like this. Because right now I could only feed it like one small code snippet at a time. It doesn't have context of all the inner workings of my program and all the things that need to be changed. If I could plug it into my entire program and have it overview the whole thing, I would imagine that could increase my productivity by quite a bit. Now here's an example where I was using ChatGPT to help me out with another project. I need to write a complex regular expression here where I had this document path, and sometimes the path had a 1 in it, sometimes it didn't. And what I needed to do is I needed to change this so that I could just extract the file name, sometimes with the 1, sometimes not. And it was kind of a difficult regular expression to figure out. I asked ChatGPT if it could make the regex for me. And it gave it an attempt, but what happened was when I tried to run the code that ChatGPT gave me through some examples and tried to run it through my actual program, I found out that there were some small problems in it. And I told ChatGPT about this, and it kind of struggled to meet the requirements of the code. However, I was able to use this as a starting point from which I was able to make the tweaks that I needed to it and finish the regex. But the problem I think that ChatGPT here had was that it doesn't have its own connection to a Ruby interpreter, doesn't have any connection to an actual compiler. It's just writing code based on what it knows from looking at the documentation of these languages and those libraries. So it could make an educated guess about what the code should be, but if it's really complex code, it might make mistakes just like a human would make when you're trying to figure out something from the documentation. And you can't really do the iterativeness of putting into an interpreter and testing whether it's coming out exactly as you think it is and modifying from there, which is the process that a human would do. I would imagine that ChatGPT could do it once you do attach it to an actual interpreter, but for now, it's just kind of winging it based on documentations that it's read, and I'm quite impressed with how well it does considering that. So I decided to mess with ChatGPT a little bit, and I gave it another example, and I told it what I wanted to do, but in this case, I gave it incorrect inputs and outputs in my examples. And this was pretty cool. It understood what I was doing based on the description that I provided it, but it told me that in the example that I provided, I gave it the wrong inputs and outputs for what I was asking. So that's pretty cool that ChatGPT was able to pick up on that. Now, when it comes to having ChatGPT look at my entire program and be integrated in my editor, I know that there's a tool out there called Github Copilot. And this is supposed to do just that. You're supposed to be able to plug it into your editor and be able to interface ChatGPT this way and have it write functions for you and have it do code completion for you. So I've been playing around with this as well, but I have to say that I'm kind of not impressed with the implementation of this tool, because what often happens to me is that when I'm typing out code, it will throw out suggestions for me and I could hit tab to accept the suggestion. But what ends up happening is, as I'm writing the code, GitHub Copilot is constantly throwing out suggestions about what to type next. And it kind of throws off my flow a bit, because each line of code that I'm writing, I'm thinking, this thing that's suggesting, is that what I really want to do? Is GitHub Copilot right? And, it's about a 50-50, where sometimes it understands what I'm trying to write, and sometimes it doesn't have the full context of the business logic that I'm trying to implement, and it'll throw out something that's very generic and kind of wrong for what I'm trying to accomplish, and then I have to not accept that. But what I don't like about GitHub Copilot is that it's so active in my editor that it actually kind of slows me down a little bit, because my programming task goes from doing what I want to do and what I want to code to kind of babysitting the GitHub Copilot and determining, okay, is GitHub Copilot correct on this one or not? Is it correct on this one or not? And then it adds extra thinking to my thought process of when I'm trying to write code. So I briefly tried out GitHub Copilot and I didn't really like it, so I disabled it. What I'd really like to do is have something a little bit more passive, where if I wanted ChatGPT to get in my code, I could go ahead and tell it, hey, I want you to change XYZ things and modify it in this way and see what it does. And then, if I don't like it, I could probably use GitHub or something like that to roll back the commit. But I'd rather be able to instruct ChatGPT on how I want it to help me, rather than having it try to be too proactive to the point where it's like a really bad employee that I'm trying to manage. Anyway, those are some ways I found ChatGPT to be useful as a programming tool so far. I'm not really worried about it completely replacing my job as a software engineer. Rather, I think this could be a very useful tool in the next few years to enhance my productivity as a software developer. So I think if you could figure out how to leverage ChatGPT to get more productivity and get more things done, you're going to be more of a 10x programmer, and you'd be able to offer more value. And I would imagine not everybody's going to be able to figure out the best ways of using ChatGPT. Anyway, I hope you liked this video, and if you did, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and hit that bell so that you know when I release the next video. See you next time.